Alright, so I'm doing this screencast here just to help you understand the Google form that's only designed to get you to think about the economics of slavery. So, as we look at this particular question, was slavery about race, politics, or economics? I guess depending on the person you are, your view on race, where you're from, everybody's going to answer this question differently. For the most part, some people might even combine some of them. It's kind of hard for you to say it's always only about race or it's about politics or economics. But hopefully, after the section here on slavery, it'll give you some deeper understanding into all of these connected explanations with regard to slavery. So I use this slide here only because I want you to always think about that the Native Americans, that these individuals were pushed off of their territory, and they're probably looking at the expansion into the North American continent as a form of imperialism, and they're fighting back. Just another point just to address there. And this question about developing the continent, I just want you to think about the labor force that's involved. If you were going to turn this into a massive city, how exactly are you going to do that? I mean, it's going to take a lot of labor to cut this down, get rid of all of this here, start building stuff. Very difficult. So you definitely need some sort of labor force. And that's the question here is, how are you going to do this? If you use European workers, they have a higher salary. Native Americans, the issue here is that these individuals are dying. They're also fighting against you. And European indentured servants, which is an issue we've looked at before, these people have to be let go. So it's all about looking for a labor force here. And slavery in Africa is already in existence. And I would say in class, like if we were talking about if there was a slave trade involving, I don't know, people from Peru, if you needed a labor force and there's some sort of slave trade that's involved with people from Peru, maybe we'd be talking about people from Peru. Just so happens that there is a global slave trade going on that involves Africa. So indentured servants, this right here is just um, looking for somebody to complete these particular tasks. Indentured servants, we looked at this in the gender section, so I'm not really going to focus too much. Again, just want you thinking about the labor force here. Now, this is another question that was in the Google form. It's looking at these particular tribes, A, B, C, and D. And here you have the cost. And again, this is not meant to be offensive. I'm just trying to really get you to think about slave trade from an economics point of view so you could see why so many people were not willing to eliminate the institution. So let's take a look at this one right here. Like, these individuals are free. The problem is, as a slave trade operator, you would have to go into this interior of Africa, which is definitely going to be problematic. If you're on the coast, this is only going to work for some time before these individuals start realizing, let's just kind of go away once those ships appear and they're able to be seen. One of the things that's often not talked about in the slave trade is the role that Africans actually have played. Now, this argument does come up. Maybe you find yourself in an argument with somebody, and they're, well, the Africans also participated, and it's kind of a sad story here. When I looked at this or the transatlantic trade, say this triangle trade, when I was in elementary school, I never really thought about that. If something's going out, meaning people, well, something has to be going in. And so there's an argument that some individuals will use. I say, well, the Africans even participated. They sold their own brothers and sisters. Okay, so I guess then if you're going to use the argument that it was only about race, then why would the Africans sell their own into slavery? And think that's the point of where they're going. So if you completed this on the Google form, it's really just to get you to think about the economics. Like, if you're going to try to get the people free, yeah, you're running the risk of going into the interior of Africa and possibly losing your life. So you have to rely on Africans, which is the point here. Eventually, you're going to see some of those stronger African tribes moving some of those weaker tribes into the coast and then selling their own people into servitude. Let's take a look at this right here. Hopefully this still works. take a look at this. Notice the years, and then you start to see we're talking about people there. 1600s, that's when we're really looking at the development of these colonies in the 1600s. Notice how there wasn't many, if any, going into this region. The American Revolution hasn't even started at this particular point, and now you start to see a couple more once those colonies here are starting to get established. Keep in mind, the American Revolution's not even there yet. And things just start to get crazy. Let me just think about, we're talking about people here. 20,000 voyages. All right, let's go back to this here. All right. So I would think about this device here, which is kind of linked to this interior item. And I only use this image because it really gets you to think about how big of an institution. So you could have another African linked to this with a chain, but this also could be designed to try to prevent you from running. So if you're somebody who was caught here, you would want to use this device to move them to the coast. And if this individual is going to try to run, just think about the difficulty you're going to have running. And this is what I meant. Like, yeah, I know people have studied slavery, maybe in elementary, middle school, but when you really start to think about the mind needed to develop this, it's just problem solving. There's a problem. Some of these slaves are running away. Well, what do? We put our engineering minds to work and we come up with this particular device, and it's pretty sick. If this was a genocide class, we would be talking about the intentionalist cumulative debate. There's an intent here. There's definitely some sort of intent with an end game for these individuals. On the Google form, permanent, involuntary, hereditary servitude, I want you thinking about these four terms. Permanent, involuntary, hereditary servitude. That means forever, it's against your will, and your children are going to be placed into slavery. PIHS. Just something to think about. And that doesn't just happen. So the first Africans coming to the colonies were actually free, indentured servants. Looking at this timeline here, 20 black indentured servants. This sheet here is what I would want you to identify as the slave codes. So here you have these years. I know it's blurry, but you have these series of laws like Massachusetts, you have Virginia, Maryland, New York, New Jersey. They slowly take these black indentured servants and one by one take away some of their rights as citizens in these colonies or indentured servants in the colonies. And before you know it, you get into a situation where all of the laws are stacked against you. There's not much that you can do. You wind up in a situation where this has happened to you. Permanent, involuntary, hereditary servitude. And these laws were called slave codes. And this was primarily all in the 1600s. These laws that were designed to slowly take away the rights. All persons except Negroes provided with arms. So they're taking away their weapons right there. And just one by one, you see your laws being stripped away, or your rights. And the black codes, these were local and state prior to the American Revolution. The end goal was to get PIHS, permanent, involuntary, hereditary servitude. On the transportation portion here, all I was trying to get you to do is, how are you going to get people over the Atlantic? If your slave capacity on your ship is 500 and the slaves are selling for 3, Africans are costing this amount, your crew could, again, I'm not trying to be offensive. It's just, there's a lot of money being made in slavery. There's going to be a lot of people trying to lobby the government, say, hey, we cannot get rid of this institution. There's just way too much money involved in it. If you've ever seen this image, it's looking at the slave ship and how you can loose or tight pack people. So if we go back here, like if you decide, hey, I'm going to take 500 slaves, I'm going to fill that ship up to capacity. Did you ever think that those conditions might create a situation where maybe 400 make it because 100 have perished on the journey that's going to take about 3 months? So loose packing and tight packing is just the way to pack your slave ship. And the fact that these terms existed should say a lot about this institution. These are images from a museum in DC. And again, they're just trying to show you the cramped quarters. Keep in mind, for 3 months, you are locked into this ship, and that's it. It's another image. That's where the slaves would be, all of the resources for the journey. And then the people up top, maybe you bring some up to the top to get some sunlight, which was the point of this section here. If you take 400, 150 don't make it. And this is, people are thinking about these variables, which is a pretty sick thought. The fact that they are starting to sell some of these individuals, that somebody has created these signs and that they are going to have an auction should say a lot about the society. The dozens in slavery. This is an interesting concept. The dozens, according to this source here, they say clowning or your mama jokes. That actually has its origins in the game called The Dozens. And The Dozens, as sad as this may seem, these were the slaves that were, somehow experiencing some sort of medical condition that maybe they couldn't work like other slaves. And as a result, you would buy them at a discount, the dozens. And it's really says something about human nature when you start to think about how slaves are all in this same situation, this horrific situation, slavery. And what's better than not being a slave would be, well, at least I'm not one of these dozens, one of these injured slaves. So it would be a way for a regular slave to poke fun at one of these slaves here. And that's kind of the point of the dozens. But it's still a game. If you looked up your mama jokes, this source here argues that it's rooted in slavery. I mean, look at this. I mean, the fact that this building exists, when you have a business, you have to apply at the county. You have to register your business. There has to be a document somewhere that is this auction and Negro sales, that there would be a record of it. And again, that's showing you that there's a link between the government and the institution of slavery. What about this one? What about female slaves? Why would they be in demand? This was again on that Google form. If female slaves are selling more because you can breed them, then does that encourage you to take more females in comparison to males? And just think about the mindset there, that somebody actually had to consider that was a worthwhile decision. It just really says a lot about this institution of slavery. What about when you're on the plantation? You need to produce 20,000 pounds of wheat. What are you going to do? These variables are just trying to get you to think about, it's costing you 50 cents to feed the slave. You have a daily operation cost, where you have to think about all of these variables. If you're looking for the answer to the question, why does slavery last so long? A portion of that is about the economics. There's just way too much money involved in this institution. And things could really get sick here. If a female slave begins reproducing slaves on her 14th birthday, how many slaves can she have by the age 20, 30, 40, 50? I mean, that's the reason why these female slaves are in demand. Slave breaking. You can't beat your slave. You don't have the, the mental capacity. You can hire somebody. This is a receipt from a slave breaking service where they basically would come in and beat your slave. Just think about that for a minute. If you watch this clip here, it'd take you to a scene from Roots where they're breaking Toby into submission. If you want to watch that, just go into YouTube and type Roots Toby. Your name is Toby. This reading here, which might be assigned, it's telling you How do you get your slave to listen? Instill strict discipline, have them believe in their inferiority, make them stand in awe of the master's power. You have to make sure that they know their place. And for some, maybe accepting the master's good behavior. Cotton gin. Look at all of the amount of the pounds of cotton that this thing is able to produce. Think about it, all of the hands needed. And that's it. What's your conclusion?